but they can grow outside, they can generate exports of Abu Dhabi. So our role is really building on the foundation of Abu Dhabi to make sure that all this opportunity becomes realized.
Kind of give us an idea how digitally rich is the economy, and what we've seen over the past few years in the case of the Gulf, the UAE, as well as Saudi.
Michael, so obviously global and regional trade patterns have shifted drastically, let's say, in the last
Invest locally in order to connect with all the university, with the research center.
One of the things, just like to set some context first, like in terms of areas that we watch very closely as Visa is how tourism is doing. And if you look at international indicators as well as our indicators. So first of all, if you look at international indicators of arrivals to Dubai or inbound arrivals to the UAE or hotel occupancy rates, they've been doing exceptionally well in the UAE over the past 12 to 24 months. When we look at our data, some of the things that we look at, for example, just as again, like setting some context, if your bank card is issued in the UAE and you travel and you use it in the UK in a face-to-face environment, you can see that. So when you think about it in the context of big data, where you have millions of travelers from a certain country of origin to a certain destination, to a certain destination type, be it beach, city, mountain, we can track all of that. And what we've seen is, again, like we've seen stellar results when it comes to inbound travel to the region over the past 12 months or so. And one of the things we also collaborate with governments to highlight or to better understand the impact of some of their policies related to Vision 2030 or economic diversification is what are the impact of some of the big events on the local economy. So think about, for example, in the case of the Abu Dhabi, what was the impact of the F1 Grand Prix? Or what was the impact of Coldplay concert? We can track that by focusing on cardholder activity and transaction. We can look at how residents behave during those events within the area of the event.
And that's a sort of investment in the country. I think
exactly.
Coldplay that time was insane, am I right?
Exactly. I don't remember the figure exactly in terms of the number of arrivals, but we've seen a significant jump. And then also we can look at tourists. Where are they coming from? How much are they spending around the event? Whether they are taking another trip, like going to Dubai and back to Abu Dhabi for that trip. So we can, we often work with government to fully understand this impact of those events on the local economy, the local community through cardholder activity.
Amazing. And speaking of the different sectors and that are coming here and like that help with investment and the investment landscape, Michael, in your view, in what ways has the UAE's economic diversification strategy influenced your portfolio decisions in terms of the companies you choose to invest in across different sectors? Has that changed? Are you more focused on energy or?
So we heard quite a lot about the private sector today. We are these guys. So we spent quite a lot of time identifying the right sectors. We have a couple of pretty strong success stories. One is in the media space with the roll-up in the out-of-home space. Second one is in the beauty sector. In both cases, what we did was we created sufficient scale here in the UAE, where you have the regulatory environment to actually do that, and then use that scale to grow regionally and from that internationally. And that's possible here. The second point that we find ourselves in many conversations with is about the regional consumer, and we pride ourselves on being a leader in that space, and a lot of discussion leads from the growth of the consumer spending in the private sector. And the last point, I cannot not mention artificial intelligence. The diversification to artificial intelligence allows us today to pick up the phone and call somebody here in ADGM, and they would come and they would have top-of-the-range offering that enables us to be at the front of.
Would you say that AI is the sector to invest in right now as a chief investment officer yourself?
To invest in and to benefit from. So a large part of our investment analysis focuses on exactly that, the value creation plan that rolls out artificial intelligence to every sector. To give you an example, in 3 weeks of rolling out various artificial intelligence platforms, before we had to roll out the training program, we saw a 15% increase in margin. Before training people what to do. It was unbelievable to watch.
Very interesting. And that's a good argument for investing in AI right now. Alessandro, ADGM uses a cluster-based model. Can you tell us about that and how it's transforming Abu Dhabi's competitiveness as an industrial hub?
Okay, when our leadership set the Falcon strategy, we were requested to identify what are the sectors and the topics that we needed to focus on. So when we did this analysis, we went really to each single industry and subsector and potential investment opportunity across the globe. And we identified a certain number of clusters. Why the clusters is so important? Because we are able to connect the dots across all the different stakeholders in the economy. So what we do in the cluster, we make sure that once we identify the investment opportunity, all the different stakeholders are aligned. So the university, the research center, the private investor, the government levers that we deploy to support the private investors. So far, we launched 3 clusters. One is the smart autonomous vehicle cluster. This cluster focuses on the future of mobility, on the sea, in air, and on the road, and robotics. We believe, and all these clusters are also based, as Michael was saying, the strong foundation of this cluster is artificial intelligence. Now, how we are building, for example, the Dhabi cluster, we are connecting international OEMs that are developing super innovative mobility vehicles, mobility investment opportunities. We are connecting with all the different stakeholders in Abu Dhabi. We are connecting with the guy that needs to train the pilots, the guy that will provide the infrastructure, the research center that needs to build some tools to support the transportation. So we make sure that the entire ecosystem will succeed around that opportunity. We launched recently also the life science cluster. And again, we make sure that the different investment opportunity that we identify around the genomics, pharma manufacturing, medtech, digital health, and AI, across those opportunity, all the stakeholders are fully aligned on what is our final objective, which is diversify the economy, but also to support, in that case, the medical security. And we also launched the food cluster. We call it Aqua, which really focuses on the future of food. The beauty of working in Abu Dhabi is that there is a stability of the economy and the political environment, and there is a very long-term vision where all the stakeholders are aligned to, from the top to the bottom. And Aqua, the food cluster, is really, in my view, the exemplification of this environment. In Aqua, our target is produce the future of food, which are alternative protein. And we make sure that this is something so new that all the stakeholders, from the federal government, the local regulator, the research institute, are all aligned on these long-term objectives. So we believe that the clusters are a platform for investors to succeed in Abu Dhabi and then to export the product internationally.
Sounds like a very stable and very a calming strategy for an investor who wants to invest in something that is so cool, like food.
And the most interesting thing is that when we receive inbound opportunities, having the concept of the cluster, we can really plug in that opportunity in this ecosystem and connect the different dots and supporting the investor.
Oh, very interesting. Mohammed, we spoke about Visa's vast amount of data that you collect. How do you use economic data to evaluate the resilience of markets undergoing structural transitions due to new policies, let's say?
Sure. So one of the things that we've developed at Visa is called the Spending Momentum Index. And just, again, like setting some context, if you look at any economy today, usually the biggest component of it from the demand side is private consumption. So in the States, for example, it's 2/3 of the economy. So if you have a high frequency view on how consumer spending is evolving, you kind of can gauge how the economy is doing. And as I mentioned, so we have the spending momentum index, and the way we do it in a given country, let's say for the UAE, we look at millions and millions of accounts, and we look at whether spending is increasing versus the same time last year, or whether it's remaining the same or is declining. So on a monthly basis, we produce this index for the UAE by Emirates. You can compare Abu Dhabi versus Dubai and so on. That tells you whether more consumers are spending more or less. And from the previous panelists, one of the challenges they were mentioning that, you know, in our part of the world, especially if you think Middle East and North Africa, there is a lack of data. If I want to know how consumer spending is evolving in those economies, usually you need to wait for 3-6 months if you're lucky. So this is where we try to fill the gap. And essentially what we've seen over the past, let's say 3 to 4 months, early part of this year, in the case of the UAE, spending has been quite stellar. Overall spending has been increasing by consumers, which reflect overall, positive backdrop and growing momentum. And in terms of, global developments with the shift in terms of potential trade war, tariffs, and things like that, we still haven't seen it trickle down to the consumer as of yet. One area where we've seen some impact is if you look at future booking of travel. Okay. In particular to the US, so inbound travel to the US from certain countries that are being targeted by tariffs, from China to Canada to Mexico to some countries in Europe as well, like Germany and Denmark. There is a bit of slowdown in terms of future booking to the States. But overall, I think our part of the world, the region remains resilient. Based on our data, we continue to see growth in consumer spending.
Very interesting. Speaking about policy reforms, Michael, to what extent are recent policy reforms that are happening, such as incentives for green energy, local manufacturing, how are they reshaping your portfolio allocations? And what sectors do you currently see as the most dynamic? We already mentioned AI, but in terms of trade and equity opportunities?
Reforms and policy are important. At the end of the day, we invest in business models, we invest in management teams, we invest in platforms. Nevertheless, what happens at the regulatory level affects what is possible on the ground. On local manufacturing, we've seen now that it is viable for a lot of sectors. Things like packaging, personal care, pharma are all definitely viable investment cases.
Okay.
We've seen some very exciting business cases in the industrial side. There is quite a lot of activity around 3D printing for some of the sectors that are relevant here. We've seen beautiful opportunities in vertical farming, combining technology with food security. I mentioned earlier a couple of energy cases. In the UAE, to be able to develop viable private sector energy propositions is quite impressive. And I cannot not go back to AI. Yep. Multiply is fanatic about AI. Yep. And it's not only what you see in the news, the big numbers that are being invested abroad. These are enablers. On everyday discussions, we see local companies developing solutions that are world-class, enabling us to be today better than our counterparts elsewhere.
We're seeing this move as a country and the world, really, but here especially, towards more greener initiatives, more greener companies. You're saying this is actually also a lucrative investment.
100%. You cannot have policy on its own driving a business model and a market forever. It can kickstart it, but it has to have a reason to exist overall, either because it provides a better product or a lower cost or a better experience. There has to be a fundamental business reason for a company to exist.
For sure. Very interesting. Alessandro, investor needs always change. How exactly in, let's say, the last few years have they changed in your view? And how is Abu Dhabi evolving to stay aligned with these ever-changing expectations in the investment landscape?
There are not only the investor needs that change, but there are also the technology that is changing very fast. So if I connect with what we were discussing before, alternative protein, you can think about that today you can produce a chicken in a plant, so you don't need any more a chicken. So, and when you have all these innovations, these changes, you need to make sure that the entire ecosystem adapts very quickly to what is happening. And what we believe that all these major changes that are happening in the, not only on the technology, but also from an investment perspective, require a long-term vision. We believe that the investor now, they are not looking for anymore for short-term return on investment, short-term yields, but they are looking for long-term growth opportunity, especially if they are focusing on alternative protein, the future of mobility, artificial intelligence. How we adapt ourselves to that? In Agio, as I was mentioning before, we truly believe in partnerships. So what we do is, first of all, we are very selective in identifying our partners, because they are not partners for a short-term opportunity, but they are partners for a long-term growth. The second thing that we do, we become, and this is what I tell always to my team, and my boss tells me, we become an integral part of the investor. So we become an extension of their team. And together, we try to address whatever problems they have or whatever challenges they have in deploying their capital or to grow their companies. One of the major tools that all the Abu Dhabi government has implemented are the sandbox. The sandbox are tools that allows all this innovation to transform, to generate a regulatory framework, as Michael was saying, that is aligned to the investments. So the beauty of coming to Abu Dhabi is that when you are plugged in this cluster, you are plugged in the environment, we make sure that the entire team, the entire government entity becomes an extension of the investor, and we support them to the entire trajectory until we succeed together. So we are building a platform not for short-term yield, not a platform for short-term returns, but we are building a platform that it is stable and they can guarantee long-term investment returns.
And speaking of partnerships, Mohammed, Visa's partnerships with local governments and businesses, how does that enhance the economic stability and growth prospects for a country like the UAE?
Sure. So I think we do a number of things. I'll just highlight a few. One of them is we make sure that we build a strong digital payment infrastructure in the country by partnering with the government and making sure that the payments are working seamlessly and efficiently and transactions are going through. Another thing is what I highlighted earlier. We work with tourism boards in terms of better understanding the impact of big events in the local economy. So this way they can gauge or quantify how they are doing in terms of economic diversification. Another thing that we do, I think, related to the economic diversification as well, we enable payments across a variety of sectors, which generally, again, contributes to the overall stability of the payment system. And finally, we do work with governments, partners, as well as the private sector in terms of raising financial inclusion, doing some financial literacy courses as well for blue-collar workers, just to overall elevate the level of education related to financial inclusion and financial literacy.
I think that brings us to the end of our panel. I want to thank our panelists for these very insightful thoughts, and I personally benefited, and I hope our audience has benefited from their insights as well. Please give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed to our fantastic panelists. A really interesting conversation there, and brilliant to have all three of you on stage. Of course, Lena also really nicely moderated there to really sort of flesh out all of the elements. Okay, let's turn our focus now to the rapidly evolving world of financial services. It really is a sector that's being redefined by innovation, regulation, and rising consumer expectations. This next session, Evolving in Finance, Exploring Tomorrow's Financial Services Landscape, will really examine the forces that are transforming the financial sector, from embedded finance all the way through to AI-driven banking, to the regulatory shifts guiding that responsible innovation, particularly here in Abu Dhabi. We're going to hear how institutions are adapting, what the future holds for digital banking, and how the region is positioning itself as a global leader in next generation finance. In the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to welcome to the stage our speakers. We have Marianne Skikluna, who is Senior Executive Director at the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of ADGM. She's going to be bringing that all-important regulatory lens to this conversation. We also have Jayesh Patel, who is the CEO of WEO Bank. They are, of course, that pioneer in digital-first banking here in the UAE. We have Sunita Passan, who is the founder and group CEO of FinStreet. Now, they're a fintech, or she is a fintech visionary, driving financial inclusion and innovation. And to moderate this forward-looking panel, we are delighted to have join us on the stage Bianca Leondari, who is a partner in financial services for Bain & Company. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'm Bianca Leondari, Vice President with the Financial Services Practice at Bain & Company. I've personally been working on change and innovation projects with our financial services clients for over 20 years. And over the last decades, as a company, we've supported financial services institutions through a number of waves of change that include financial crisis, deregulation, re-regulation, M&A, digitalization. And lately, if I have to reflect on what are some of the change and innovation topics that are keeping us busy, there's a couple of things that we work a lot on. One is Gen AI and AI, not whether to adopt it, but how to adopt it at scale and in a way that drives return on investment. And the second topic is how to find growth through innovative business models, such as, for example, spin-offs, carve-outs, monetization of assets that banks have in the back office or in the front office capabilities, ecosystem plays like embedding financial services in the ecosystem of the customer. So a lot of exciting change and innovation initiatives like that. What strikes me and strikes us as a firm about the time we're living in right now in financial services is the breadth of the change, because if you think about something like Gen AI, this really touches on the whole value chain of financial services, back to front. The speed of it is really fast, as you all know. And the third thing is that these are not changes that are just transient or temporary trends. These are changes that are there to stay. So we're actually living through a time of structural change of the financial services industry, which is really exciting. And therefore also the regulation will have to structurally change to go with it. And the speed of response and adaptation of financial services companies to this change is what will decide who will be the winners and the losers in the next years. So very exciting, let's say, context, but now let's hear from our panelists. All of you in the respective organization, you're really at the forefront of change. So maybe let me ask a few questions, and I will start with Jayesh. So at the head of a digital-first bank that is pretty much built from scratch, what is one way that you're really rethinking, reinventing the way banks operate? And what has been most successful in your journey so far?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. You know, we live in a time where change is changing faster than it's ever been. Yep. The second big thing that's happening is consumers are a lot smarter than they were yesterday. They get information from plenty of sources. They want to be more empowered. So if you look at the world of banking, I think there's two big shifts. One is consumer expectations. And what we've done at WEO is we've built an SME app and a retail app. Well, we're saying we're not just going to give you an account. We want to be the operating system of your money. So everything money in one place. On the business side, we provide a platform so that you can run your business. You started a business because you're passionate about something, not about banking necessarily. This platform gives you these capabilities. And in retail, we help you manage your money so you grow and you're wealthier and you achieve more of your goals. So I think there is this shift from delivering products to delivering experiences and platforms and capabilities that help our customers. The second one, I think, is a more structural change. Banks traditionally like to build everything, have large capex structures. What that does is it makes it very hard for them to compete with tech-centric companies. If you look at us, we partner with a lot of folks in the ecosystem because we believe there are some things we are very good at. If we are a product factory, we'll build the products. We're happy to distribute through any other digital platform. If we are a great distribution platform, we'll consume from others and we'll distribute products. We don't have to do everything. So I think there is this shift of more deciding where you want to play and not playing everything. I think the second one is organizational. Yeah? Having this more OPEX-centric model so that you can change where you invest faster. That drives more agility in organizations, which I think makes you build better products for your customers.
Thank you very much, Jitesh. Sunidhi, maybe next. As a financial services market infrastructure provider, what are the key innovation initiatives that you're working on?
Thank you, Bianca, for having me, and thank you, Economy Middle East. I want to start with that, there are literally systemic problems in the way that capital markets work today. Public markets, as we know, are jurisdiction bound, and private markets are locked up, which means that there is illiquidity, there is lower cash returns that come out as opposed to the paper returns that are promised. And so within this gap, with global capital and global assets that want to exchange hands, how do you do that? And does current infrastructure keep up with that? Public market, clearly no. Private market, there is no infrastructure that exists. So let's start with the opportunity at hand. You already have $15 trillion of assets under management in private markets. Now within private markets, if we look at private credit, which today sits at $2 trillion AUM, is soon to compound to $30 trillion AUM. On the other hand, if you look at private equity companies, 75% of all companies that have $250 million and above revenue are actually private. So, with all of this in the background in terms of the opportunity and then the inefficiency that currently exists in the market, in private markets, where you have a manual syndication, which is, one GP to another client, or family offices or pension funds, etc. You have GPs running after the same LP money. You have LPs who are seeking liquidity. So in the middle of this huge market of scale for assets and for liquidity, we've created FinStreet, which is the first of its kind financial market infrastructure that allows for global securities from across the world to be listed, traded, settled with lifecycle asset servicing, all on one infrastructure, and it allows for global issuers, global investors to participate in one infrastructure. And of course, we have the great regulation, we have the leadership of the UAE that is promoting the capital to actually flow, and not just flow outward from Middle East to any other country, but for capital to also be attracted in a virtuous capital flywheel. And finally, the impact that I believe that FinStreet can create is that assets globally should be able to be marked idiosyncratically, and not just because they belong to a country, which can be either the West or the East. As well as the fact that there is $4 trillion of annual deficit in global South economies, and that's where FinStreet can provide legal neutrality and liquidity to those assets is completely game-changing.
Thank you very much, Sunidhi. Let me go to Marianne. From an ADGM perspective, what are the developments that the regulator is seeing in the industry which are directly related to AI and latest technological advancements?
So financial services, as was mentioned in the introduction, has been extricably linked to AI and technological development. And it's been an evolution, and we're seeing transformation across all the sectors and across all types of firms.
And we're seeing this transformation and evolution happening in two main ways. Traditional firms adapting their business models and integrating AI and technology in their existing processes, but also we're seeing the emergence of innovative business models that are leveraging AI and technology. And just to name a few examples of what we're seeing in this space, one of the biggest sectors that we have in ADGM is the fund and management assets sector. And we're seeing, for example, the emergence on the retail side of robo-advisors with platforms based on technology, with automated investment strategies based on user profiles and goals. We're seeing the fund space is institutional in nature in ADGM, and we're seeing increased interest in the hedge fund space, which brings with it more algorithmic trading. Definitely, I cannot not mention blockchain and the DeFi space. We're seeing the adoption of or increased interest as well in terms of transactions based on smart contracts. We're seeing as well peer-to-peer business models being developed, especially in the trading area, as mentioned by Suniti, but also in other spaces, as well as in the lending space, with private financing platforms, for example, being developed. And we're also seeing different products being offered, especially in the crypto space, with the stable coin, the emergence of stable coins, and more interest even from the consumers in those type of products. And also the adoption of technology and AI in internal processes by firms, especially in the space of money laundering, relation to money laundering prevention in relation to customer identification, transaction monitoring, with face recognition, surveillance monitoring of transactions. So it's quite wide-ranging and encompassing. And for us, it's very important as a FSRA to keep up to speed with all these developments, to make sure that we can continue to deliver on our regulatory objectives of maintaining the financial soundness of firms, the protection of consumers of financial services, but also the integrity and the reputation of ADGM as a jurisdiction. So that's the maintenance and close engagement and monitoring of these market developments is a crucial part of our approach, which we maintain through various collaborations, both at industry level. For example, we engage a lot with Hub 71. That gives us insights of industry initiatives, and we also take part in Hub 71 plus digital assets review on an annual basis. We collaborate a lot with other regulators as well to share knowledge and experiences. We collaborate with our firms. We have the Reg Lab and the Digital Lab, which offers them opportunities to develop new business models and allows us to continue to develop our framework on lessons learned in that space.
Thank you very much, Marianne. The second question I would like to ask our panel is, we all know that innovation change is not easy, especially if one wants to do it at scale and on a continuative basis. So maybe let me ask Jayesh, in your experience, how do you keep on going with growth and innovation? What are the kind of internal cultural aspects, maybe the external partnership and ecosystem enablers that allow you continue.
Yeah, look, if anyone figures it out, please let me know. It's not easy. I think we have a few ingredients. It's like building a football team. Yeah, you're always trying to figure out what is the team that gets you to win the championship. I think there are a few elements that stand out. Yeah, the first one is the organization structure. You have a traditional organization structure which is hierarchical, and the decisions come from the top. I think if you look at us, we have a set of principles. These principles are the principles by which we deliver products and services to our customers. Anybody at any level can say this isn't right for our customer because it doesn't follow the principle. So I think you need to relook at shifting the power in the organization to making sure it's based on principles rather than levels in your organization. I think that's one. The second big thing is I think you need to look at the talent pool that sits and what roles they play. If you look at traditional financial organizations, you have the folks, and I have a regulator beside me. So you have the folks who are supposed to say no, yeah? But you also want to bring the folks who are supposed to push for a yes to the same table. Yeah? So at VO we have product owners, yeah? We have chief design experience officers, and these folks just fight for consumers. So I think you need to do that. The third thing is I think you need to be very clear where you want to be amazing at, where you want to be good at, where you're okay to be okay at. I think the notion that you'll be amazing everywhere, not gonna happen. Yeah? And I think once you have that mapped out, I think you have some hope to keep on changing at the pace at which the industry is changing.
Very, very insightful. Thank you, Jayesh. Soniti, maybe, what are some of the challenges you are facing in your field about innovation? What are the barriers and what are you doing about them?
Look, we've started with a very ambitious plan, which is that we want to connect global assets to global capital. So of course there will be challenges. But I was in US last week and I was speaking to the policy makers, and interestingly what they are saying in the US now is that they want to do financial deregulation. And they want to do privatization of the US economy, reprivatization of the economy. And then on the other hand, when you look at Europe, they are legislating them faster than the world is fracturing with all the tariffs or other contexts that are applied to the world today. So, of course, the fact that we are part of ADGM, which is an international law and allows for issuer passporting, investor passporting, helps us. But the problem is, what is international acceptable law now, given that everybody is trying to go in their own directions? But fundamentals, as Jayesh mentioned, they never change. And the fundamentals that we build our credibility on, which is when we are asking sovereigns, pension funds, large asset managers, investors to trust their capital, to trust their assets with us, there has to be the credibility. And where does that come from? Is from the robust governance and the good rule of law that we are following under ADGM. So just to give you examples, we have segregation of client money with the largest Bank of UAE, FAB. So that's one partnership. But equally, we also have segregation of client assets. So, it's a nominee structure so that the clients are always comfortable with the way that we handle their assets and the way that we handle their capital. But another trend that I have seen is that now some of the funds, they are trying to set up their own internal market for exit. So, when I mentioned that just already there is 1 trillion of private assets that need exit. So, funds are trying to either come up with innovative structure, which is, an evergreen fund or continuous vehicle, or even set up something like a private financing platform, which becomes a bit, prejudiced because they're only catering to their own assets and own clients. So what we have built is completely neutral. And I think education around that is, one of the challenge, because when people think of listing private assets, they think of it as onerous as public market, with the disclosures, with the other regulatory compliance costs. But the way that we've set up our exchange, our securities trading venue is not that onerous. It's only to access the globally dispersed capital. So that's kind of the challenges we are facing as well as mitigating.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Sunidhi. Marianne, from a regulatory perspective, I'd like to know specifically, if we think about Gen AI impact, RegTech, how is that impacting your own operations? What are some of the initiatives you're doing there, and what are some of the challenges you're facing?
We're looking at, obviously, we are a regulator as an institution. So we have two facets to this. How our firms are developing in the use of AI and technology, and how that will impact our supervisory approach and authorization approach, and then also our internal operations. So we're as a regulator, we are technology agnostic. However, we have recently issued IT risk management guidance, which includes also a chapter on AI and the use of technology by our firms. And in it we lay out our expected outcomes and some risk areas that we want firms to be cognizant of. We are also working with other local regulators within the UAE to ensure a more coordinated approach. So hopefully there will be announcements in the near future in this space. On an internal processes level, we have issued open reg. We're calling it Open Reg, which is machine readable with labeled data sets of our rule books to make it more user-friendly for our firms, and with the hope to continue to make it, to continue to increase the level of compliance and accessibility of our rules across the sectors. We are looking at different ways of also integrating AI into our internal operations. So we're looking at using AI in terms of reviews of submissions by firms. We're looking at different aspects of computational technology for reviewing of data sets. And that will help us both at authorization levels, but also as part of our day-to-day supervisory duties. We're looking at how we can use the existing data to enhance our risk profiling and risk assessment of firms. So there's a lot of work that is going in this space. I mean, obviously, the main challenge is time. Finding the right resources and working collaboratively with all different stakeholders, because whatever we do has impact not just on us internally, but also outside the regulator and whoever utilizes our rules and regulations and the way we supervise firms.
Great, thanks a lot. And quite a lot of change. It sounds like the regulator is keeping up with the pace of innovation, so we need to watch out. Okay, so last question from my side. This is more kind of high-level perspective. If you were to think about the next years, what excites you the most, or maybe keeps you awake at night about the future of financial services? And what should we do about it? Maybe we'll start with Jayan.
Yeah, so, you know, when I was growing up, those of you who are as old as I am, being a banker wasn't cool. Well, for the past 10 years, the amount of money that has gone in finance and fintech, I think it's an industry that's going to continue to change. You know? So I think there's a lot of change. Change brings exciting opportunities, helps us grow the pie, helps us serve customers better. So I think there's a lot of stuff. I think AI till last year was a hype for valuation. I think this year we're seeing real use cases. You know, I always tell the team, imagine you're looking for a book and somebody sends you to a library and says, on the 3rd floor, there are all the books on ADGM. Imagine another service where you go and they say, yes, there's 1,000 books on ADGM, but here's a summary of the best stuff from all of them. That's the difference between Google and ChatGPT. I use Google because I think it's the coolest. My kids use ChatGPT. Now, they are a mind shift away from where I am. And figuring out what these consumers with these capabilities are going to need, to me, is the most exciting part.
Sunidhi?
So I think, thank you, Bianca. I can start a debate here. You've allowed me the opportunity. You know, we call private markets as alternatives because they're supposed to be alternative to the mainstream, which is public market. But you know, in the context today, when public markets are structurally declining, not only in the US, in Europe, and any other country. So the question is private market truly an alternate, or is it foundational to any investor's portfolio? And so therefore, what excites me is that FinStreet has been given the opportunity to re-architect how global assets and global capital will move in this foundational asset class, you know, is very exciting. But equally, the fact that it's stemming from the UAE, which has the largest and the deepest pools of capital, is the largest investor in the world, has assets that they own and not just manage. So the fact that we have this market and post-trade infrastructure, which is being led by the UAE, you know, at the forefront of capital markets, the change of capital markets, to me is very exciting and, you know, full of responsibility as well.
Exciting indeed. Thank you, Sunidhi. And Marianne, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we're quite excited with the different opportunities and different products that are being we're seeing as a result of AI and technology. And the change has been quite rapid. And we're seeing more financial inclusion, more efficiency, better cost management in the finance sector, which is quite exciting. And it also keeps life interesting, right? On a day-to-day basis. What is most important for me is that we harness the added value of AI and technology by using it responsibly. And we can only do that by all stakeholders maintaining that ongoing dialogue and engagement. Because whatever one stakeholder does has an impact across the sector and on consumers.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and I completely concur on the level of excitement for the future of financial services. As I mentioned before, I think we are in a moment of structural transformation of the whole industry, and we're all playing active roles in a way or the other to shape it, so extremely exciting. Thanks a lot to the panelists for sharing your insightful perspective. A round of applause for our audience. Thank you very much.
Really big round of applause and huge thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you very much indeed for such an interesting conversation. If you could all come together for a nice picture, that would be brilliant. Really interesting to learn more there about the different ways in which financial services are developing, you know, not just globally, but right here in Abu Dhabi. Real sense that the community here is leading the charge there. So huge thanks there to our panelists. Now, we're going to take a quick coffee and snack break, which I know everyone will very much enjoy. I would just mention that it's well worth coming back here promptly at 12:15 we have a much anticipated fireside chat with His Excellency Mohammed Ali Al Sharafa, of course, Chairman of Abu Dhabi Department of Municipalities and Transport. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation because, of course, Abu Dhabi is developing very, very quickly indeed. And with that development, there's a need to ensure that it remains livable. So very much enjoying and looking forward to that conversation. I'll see you back here in 15 minutes or so.
time.